Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, October 9th edition of the Image Builder Office Hours, a subproject of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. Just a reminder that this meeting does adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. So in general, please be excellent to one another. We have a relatively short agenda today, and this is our first meeting. So if there are any topics that you want to discuss, please go ahead and add them to the agenda document. And I can go ahead and link that in the chat. Also, if you're here, feel free to add yourself to the attendee list as well. All right. With that, the first item that we have is Moshe discussing goals, non-goals, and roadmap.
Cool. I think it might be a good idea if we kind of all go around the virtual table and say what we want to try and get out of this project. I know I have some goals in mind, but I don't know if everybody has the same goals or different goals. So I'm kind of looking for a tool to end the all tools. So focusing on the end user perspective. If I'm a new end user coming to Kubernetes land, I want to be able to get Kubernetes images in a very easy and consumable way that I can then also easily customize and extend if my enterprise requires it. So that's kind of my Uber goal, whatever that means.
I can go next. Video on. I am mostly working on creating, the same thing, but for maintaining images for use and consumption by Cluster API. My focus so far has been on creating OVA images, so for consumption on VMware infrastructure. But I would also like to see kind of over time the tools converge. One of the main goals that I have right now is creating repeatable builds for images that can be consumed by CatV and also for AWS if needed, that kind of stuff. But make them both repeatable and customizable. Eventually, we'll be in a position where the company I work for is shipping images that are created by this tool, but we expect customers or end users to be able to create their own and customize them until their heart's content. So that's what I'm working on.
I guess I can go next. Similar to Travis, my main focus is on basically building and maintaining images for Cluster API. Ideally, we'd have the same tool that we can use for kind of like default images that can be used for demo or POC use cases and easily use that we publish through the community, but also have the same process that people could use to build and maintain their own images for their own environment. So wherever they need to worry about any type of security compliance or anything like that, they should be able to use the same tool that we're using upstream to be able to produce those images, track those images, and ship those images for their own consumption.
I can go?
Yep.
Yeah, I think what I would like is so I think this tool that we're building is the output is images, but everything I think that is done to actually create those images, except for the very last step, which is to package them up in a particular way that can be consumed by something like QEMU or KVM or Amazon, etc. There are a lot of steps that I think are common to or to users that are not building images, but maybe are provisioning already running operating system with the dependencies that they need to get Kubernetes up and running. So it would be great if that functionality in this tool were also accessible to somebody. So I can use this tool to run on a provisioned host and get all the same sort of changes applied to that live host, and just not produce the image artifact at the end, but still have be able to benefit from all the work that's being done in the community.
Dims or Nadir?
Yeah, go ahead, Nadir.
I think it's a time delay that always gets me. Yeah, so until recently, I was in the field engineering organization at VMware, so it's customer facing. So just want to make sure as we go along that we have the right toggles and customizability, and it's usable by our end users generally. But just repeating it, what everyone else says otherwise.
Hi. So my main interest here is how do we test this stuff? So I wanted to see if there are thoughts around how we could inject stuff into the images so that we can run E2E tests against and use the images in E2E tests. Thank you.
Does anybody have any strong opinions against anybody's use cases? So are we all kind of on the same page, aligned and going in the same direction? So if I don't hear any no, I'm going to assume that we are in the same direction. And maybe the next step is to just create a PR on the README and kind of outline these to keep everyone going forward. If anybody disagrees. So I'm going to take that as a no. And then next up is consumption customization model. So I'll probably start with the first one. What are the artifacts or the outputs of this project? So at the moment, I don't think we have any direct artifacts. So it might be, the project might be being used downstream, for example, CapV to create images and then upload them, but I'll do that more as not an artifact of ours, but an artifact of CapV. So we really, I think, need to decide on how we package things up, how we version them, and what are we packaging? Are we packaging the tool and the scripts to create the images, or we are packaging and publishing images directly? So my opinion on this is that we should probably be doing both, but I'd like to hear everybody else's comments as well.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different challenges that we have. One of them is especially, how do you consume these images from a tool like Cluster API or some other project? And if there is a preconditioned step for even the demo or PRC use case that you have to create images and publish them somewhere before you can get started, that's a pretty heavy requirement for users who are just trying to kick the tires with your project. So in those use cases, having pre-published images that are consumable is a huge benefit and a huge ease of use for kind of those non-production use cases. That said, if we do publish those artifacts, we need to be very clear about what the support contract is on published images. And so far today, there hasn't been much interest within the Kubernetes community on supporting pre-published images in any type of real use case. Because then you start having to, basically handle any type of CVE against any component, be it in the base OS or the dependency chain, in addition to just the Kubernetes artifacts and all of that. And that's not something that the volunteers that run the infrastructure and release process have been interested in trying to support. Yeah.
I will say that I agree as far as versioning goes. I agree with Moshe that I'd like to see both, the images and the tool itself versioned, because that has come up on my side where we wanted to produce new images for, say, the same Kubernetes version, but some things within the tooling has changed, and it wasn't necessarily easy to identify, okay, what version of the tool was this built with, because they do produce different outputs for very good reasons. So that's how we do that is of interest to me, especially since I start thinking about it from the Git perspective and tagging. And right now, this repo has multiple projects in it. There's kind of the CAPI image generator. There's the tooling that Moshe has contributed. And we may not want to tag at the same time. So that creates some friction there about how to version those changes in a way that we all agree on.
So just a question or a follow-up to Jason on the lack of kind of support or to support images due to CVs coming out. I understand why other people might not do it, but is that something that maybe this project can handle, is actually providing some limited security support for images so that we can kind of level up the playing fields for everyone to say, use these images, consume the updates, and we'll do our very best to give you not defect-free, but CVE-free images. Is that something that we want to even consider tackling, or completely making a non-goal?
So I think any precondition for there to be some type of supportable method for actually providing that type of support, we'd have to have kind of like a fully automated release pipeline to even really make that feasible. Ideally, we'd also have some type of automated scanning that we can run against the existing images to trigger the fact that we need to update the images. Without that automation, I hesitate to say that it's something that we should support, just because it could easily take up, a whole, if we were talking about within a corporation, it would easily take up a full FTE resource to be able to track this and publish all of these images across all of the different cloud providers that we're talking about. In addition, not all of the cloud providers really make it easy to publish images, which also means that we would also have to work on getting images into their respective marketplaces and all of that stuff too. So while I think it's a nice to have the public images, I am not sure without more automation and buy-in from the cloud providers themselves, how feasible it is to really do.
Does it make sense for us to perhaps put this at the end of a roadmap, and in the middle of that roadmap we have the automation for the pipeline, for releasing, for scanning, and make sure But when it comes to saying we're going to publish an image, we've ticked all of these boxes, and it's more of a formality than anything else. Does it make sense to do that?
So I kind of like the idea, but I don't necessarily like the idea for signing up for the work to do that. So I don't want to make a commitment for the rest of the group towards it.
Also, okay, we can make the one prior step to publishing is we need a sufficiently sized group of volunteers willing to provide on-call support for this. If we don't get a sufficiently sized group, then we can't provide the support. So maybe we make that another precondition as well.
So something
Any other
that
comments?
just something that comes to mind is if we like this idea, but in general it seems like too much work to take on, we could, I think, try out the idea by saying, we will take on this support for a single cloud provider and a single, let's say, variant, the single operating system, right? And then just see how difficult supporting that is. And if we get some signal on that, then we can say, okay, no, there's no way that we can take this on. Or maybe, we'll get a different signal and they're like, okay, maybe we can expand this to more, make that matrix larger. That seems like a way to at least see if if it's feasible. But yeah, again, I personally, I don't think I could commit. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot.
So I can say right now with what I do today for pushing the cluster API images for the AWS provider, I generally try to relatively fast follow the Kubernetes releases. And with doing that, it normally takes about 2 to 3 hours out of my day between creating the images, dealing with any potential breakage in the tooling, and then testing those images with just like a simple cluster, deploying a simple cluster. If I do, like the last time I did it, it was based on a CVE fix that had 3 different cluster API releases. So there was 1.16, 1.15, 4, and like 1.14.9 or something. That ended up taking the better part of, the afternoon, to accomplish all of that. So it's, at least today, it's not a trivial amount of time to publish and track the work for those. But if we do get somebody that is willing to do that, I would definitely be interested in working with them to, one, understand the process that we've been going through so far, but also other potential hazards with the process as well, if we're trying to track more than just the Kubernetes releases.
Any other comments on this area?
Just one on potential licensing issues as well. So I think Canonical has a redistribution license, for example. So, I mean, should be fine technically from a CNCF standpoint, but there might be issues with some of these distributions if we are also the publisher of the images.
Okay. So I think maybe we can, if nobody has any other topics, we can maybe talk a little bit about testing. Dims, maybe you want to paint us an ideal picture from what you would like from a testing perspective, or you like to see?
Hi. So one thing that I'm trying to see is we are in this project we are building images, right? But then these images have specific versions of kubelet and kubeadm and kubectl that goes into them. I'm trying to see if there is a way to speed things up so that we are able to test CapG, for example, easily without having to build everything all over again. That was one aspect of it. The other aspect is how do we test, say there is a PR in KK, and we want to test that with the rest of everything else, like cluster API, CapG. How do I easily build a Kube API server, for example, and use the custom Kube API server and bring up CapG with it? So that was the other variation. So one is the pre-built packages that goes into the image builder. The second one is starting up the Kubernetes services with the right bits that was locally built. Those are the two things that I'm debating on how we should be doing those. Does that help?
Yeah, is it maybe not a case of building like a new kubelet based on a specific SHA and using a known working image with that kubelet? Is that
Correct.
the use case you're talking about? Or
Yes. So just to give you a little bit more background, over the last couple of weeks, we stood up end-to-end testing for CapG. So we have two variations. One variation is we use a CAP cluster API and CAB PK, which are pinned to specific known versions that work. And the other one is both CAPI and CAPBK at master. So those are the two variations that we currently test. This is on test grid. If you can't find it, just tell me and I'll send you a link. So those are working fine. They are green and they show when there is a problem with CAPI, and we can it goes red, and then we can go fix whatever was broken, right? And it captures enough information for us. But what I haven't been able to test is how do I test things that are, say I want to use Kubernetes, the artifacts from CI cross, which gets updated every few hours. How to test those kinds of things. And while looking into that and talking to Jason, we realized that there are two things we still have to somehow manipulate in the CI jobs. And one was the DPN packages that goes into Image Builder, which can be we can build the Debian packages and use the Image Builder to build images just for that single run, but then it just takes longer. So that was one. The other one was the container images.
okay, that makes sense. Travis, I think you posted a comment on the defined CI and test approach. Has everybody seen that issue? It's issue 18.
And I know I kind of started that, and then I got pulled into some specific new work priorities, and I kind of left it for the last couple of weeks, so I haven't commented on it in a while. But yeah, I mean, kind of to your point, Dims, yeah, like it's hard for me to wrap my head around a rapidly changing CI process, or being able to test individual PRs when, at least from my perspective, this tool is producing very heavyweight images. Like, it takes a long time to build. There's the customization hooks in there where we can pull in packages from non-standard sources, container images from non-standard sources, though the container images are a little bit harder. But since the cluster API image process creates a whole VM at the end, whether it's hosted in a cloud provider or it's a disk image that you download and use, they're big because they're entire OS images. So just creating one to test a small change is really complicated right now, and is at a very heavyweight process. I think it'd be more about starting from a known good place and then maybe replacing a single binary or replacing a single container. And that's more of a regular CI process. You're not testing the image, you're testing the Kubernetes artifacts.
Right.
I know that's nothing specific. I'm just talking out loud, but yeah, I don't see a world where you generate a whole new image for each test, because that's just completely unwieldy.
Understood. Agreed. So yeah, we can first tackle the post-summit jobs, where we are not thinking, we are running something every few hours, right? 6 hours, say 3 hours or 6 hours. So in that case, then we can easily build the VM images themselves. But then we still have the problem of container images. How do we make sure that we are able to inject the right container images? So that would be the problem there. If we can tackle that problem, then we can, go backwards from there, get that going, and then tackle the next problem, I guess.
I think, at least for the cluster API images, I think that is being worked on, because VMware has some needs there to be able to use container images that are not the upstream ones, and pull them into the image. So I think that's happening anyway. And I kind of alluded to that before, because it was hard. I think so kubeadm doesn't want to pull those by default, and there's some issues there, but I think they've been being worked out.
So what is the approach there, and who's working on it, Travis?
The main person working on it right now is not on this call, but he's on my team.
Okay.
He's one of my coworkers and yours. So it's Hui.
Okay.
He's mostly doing that.
Okay.
So he's the one who I think would know the most about pulling in custom container images into the image stamping tool for Cluster API.
Perfect. I'll have a conversation and bring whatever I learn to this call. Thank you.
Sorry, I have a quick question here. So, because I'm not very familiar with the image builder, are we building VM images with the tool?
Yeah, so on the Cluster API side, there's basically a variant for each cloud provider. And so CatV consumes OVAs, so that's a single VM image. On AWS, it creates AMIs, things that end up hosted within the cloud provider. So you end up with something hosted within GCE, AWS. Yeah, so they're VM images.
So Docker supports the commit command. Is there basically something similar for the tools that would build, for instance, the GCP images?
That's not something I'm familiar with, so I don't know the answer there. Anybody else?
So you mean an equivalent where you start off with an image and then make a small diff into it, so you're not having to rebuild into anything. So just one layer on top. So I think with the Packer model, that's not doable out of the box.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Right now, there's nothing in the CAPI image generators that does that. You're generating a whole new disk, whole new VM image every time. The cluster, the CAP-A provider starts with an existing AMI. So it's starting with an existing image with an OS on it, and then customizing it and creating a new AMI, but the CAP-V generator starts from an ISO. It's actually on my list right now. One of the things I'm doing is to break that into 2 stages, because the image that we create after you do the ISO installed is identical each time, almost. That's why I haven't split it up, but it's about to be, where it's kind of a 1-to-1 between like an ISO and an image. It'll never change. Once that's in place, it'll be a 2-step process, so you don't have to do the ISO install every time. But right now you do, and that's one of the most time-consuming parts.
I can talk about the config admin approach, and that one, it works off cloud images. So it doesn't start with an ISO or an AMI. It will download a cloud image and then boot that as a VM, inject some commands and files to run at boot time, and then shut down to create an image. So that actually creates an image in about 7 minutes, 6 or 7 minutes. And then you can take that image as an output and use it as an input to another image build process. So for example, updating just one file or binary or container, and that should be under a minute type thing.
So one of the things that I worry about if we try to centralize and start with kind of similar cloud images across the different providers is, are we actually producing images that are optimized for the cloud providers that we are building for in the end? So for example, for AWS, the Ubuntu images, they use an AWS oriented kernel rather than the standard Ubuntu kernel. I want to make sure, like, one of the reasons why we initially went with the Packer route, and for the AWS one using the upstream images as a base, was to kind of get those optimizations and configurations built in to where we're not having to kind of track those and maintain those separately. And I worry a bit about the maintenance cost of trying to chase those.
So I think we can support both options. So once you have the basic approach of building an image, we can start with a disk image, or we can start with an AMI. And instead of going the full-blown Packer route, which is to create security groups and SSH keys and SSH into the instance, which creates a whole bunch of problems, we can boot an AMI with Cloud Init, let it install and configure everything, and then shut down and create an AMI from that. And that process will actually have less dependencies in terms of things to create, and it should be faster as well, because you're not having to SSH into the instance. So you can follow a hybrid approach.
On Ubuntu concretely, it's not really a separate kernel as such. Ubuntu compiles from the same source for all their kernels, but they carved down to reduce the size of the image. They tailored down which modules are put into each cloud provider's image. But technically, you can install the generic kernel, which covers all bases. So there are options there, and my feeling is there's actually a lot less difference between the kernels which are required, because most of the pieces that you need are in the mainline kernel these days, like Elastic Network Adapter and like the KVM and Zen fixes. They've mostly been, and Hyper-V have mostly been in upstream now. So it's probably not that big I think you can probably leave that one aside. I don't think it's solvable, but there might be other issues, certainly.
I think part of the issue is that the process and the configurations that feed the base images that the different distributions publish to the different cloud providers is not a transparent process. So we don't necessarily have insight into what they are doing differently versus the kind of generic cloud images that they're publishing.
I guess going back to basically the topic that DIMS wanted to investigate with the GCP provider testing Kubernetes itself. DIMS, can you clarify to me, like, how are we even telling the GCP provider to use our custom images? Like, how are we doing using test infra this bit?
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. Right now, the only thing that we are able to use is what we currently try, right? 116.0 and 116. I don't know if 116. Well, so things that are already published into the GCR repository, right, and things that are already available. That's why I was trying to look into what are the images that we build in the CI cross equivalent job. I think they changed the name of it. So there used to be a job that runs the CI cross images that builds all the container images. So I was looking into that first, just to see if we could inject a specific one that was built recently, rather than the ones that are published tagged.
Okay, because of the immutability of the Coaster API itself, we cannot amend binaries on the images, or we shouldn't, but we can, I guess.
Right. The overall effort is how do we get rid of /cluster, right? And to get rid of /cluster, we need something equivalent, and the closest something equivalent to that, the existing kubep script is capg, right? And then if we have to do capg, then how do we test latest changes in KK? That's the problem statement, how we ended up there.
Yeah, and also there might be some discussions around whether are we going to use the COS images from Google, the GKI optimized images that are currently being used by kubep.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that right now. I just want a general solution, which could be, which may not even use Google Cloud, to be honest. But we'll start there because that's where most of our infrastructure is right now. So if you can do Ubuntu, that's fine. We'll start there, and then we'll see how we can extend that to COS images.
Yeah, okay. Do you want, we can book a meeting with you to discuss this topic to not overwhelm this meeting?
Yes, perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other topics they want to discuss?
Just briefly, I did have some feedback from Azure last week. It came up in the discussion around machine pools, that just more like for your information about how they consume images for AKS and how they continue to plan to do so is they see pre-baked images as an optimization, so to speed and up boot, but they do also do things like hotfixes are done during boot. So they will replace, they will do like an update during boot to get latest bits and then eventually publish a new image. So it's not necessarily that for every single item as soon as possible that they need a new release. So they're probably looking at maybe doing a tool to do that at some point.
Do we want to have any action items for the next meeting in 2 weeks' time?
So I think the biggest one would be the PR around the documenting the goals and use cases.
Okay, I can do that one. And then if there's nothing else, we can call it a wrap. Going once, going twice. Third time. Cheers, everybody.
Yeah, bye everyone.
Yeah, thanks for setting
everyone.
this up and getting it started.
Cool.
Right.